What if you paid for your first-class seat fair and square, but the crew still asked you to move not because of an error, but because someone more important wanted it? What if the only difference between you and everyone else in that cabin was the color of your skin? Ava Bennett, a composed and accomplished black executive, boards a flight to Seattle with her teenage daughter, expecting just a quiet ride. But when a powerful white businessman demands the very seat she's already sitting in, and the airline crew tries to push her out with lies and pressure, Ava is forced into a choice no one should have to make: disrupt the peace or disappear quietly. But Ava doesn't move. And what happens next goes far beyond a single flight. It sparks a conversation, a reckoning, a legacy. Will one act of quiet defiance change an industry, or will the system crush her back into silence? Get ready for a true story of strength, dignity, and the cost of being visible.
Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support powerful stories that deserve to be seen. Now, let's take our seat. Ava Bennett stood in front of her bathroom mirror, a half-zipped suitcase lying open on the bed behind her. She pressed a palm to her abdomen, grounding herself the way her therapist had taught her. Deep breath in. Count to 4. Let it go. The early morning sun spilled across the white tile floor, warm but distant, much like the relationship she was about to revisit this weekend. Her father's 70th birthday party loomed in her mind like a formal gala for ghosts, old colleagues, former adversaries, and unspoken conversations with Solomon Bennett himself. She hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Ava's fingers hovered over her makeup pouch before settling on the usual, a soft brown eyeliner. Neutral lip balm. Nothing too flashy. Just enough to remind people she was put together. That she always was. Behind her, the unmistakable thud of teenage footsteps bounced through the hallway. Mom, have you seen my AirPods? Layla's voice, half asleep and wholly irritated, drifted into the room. Kitchen drawer, next to the bananas. Ava called back without looking. Her daughter had asked that question every time they'd traveled over the last year. A moment later, a petite figure leaned in the doorway. Layla, 15 and permanently skeptical of mornings, was dressed in leggings, a hoodie, and fuzzy slippers. Her curls were shoved under a satin bonnet, and her face bore the expression of someone dragged from sleep under protest. I still don't get why we couldn't take Grandpa's jet like last time, she muttered. Ava raised an eyebrow in the mirror, applying mascara with practiced steadiness. Because normal people fly commercial. Grandpa doesn't... Ava turned, arms crossed, a small smile curving at the corner of her mouth. Your grandfather's not normal. He's the exception, not the rule. Layla sighed and slouched against the doorframe, hugging herself against the early spring chill. You work hard, too. It's not like you're some random assistant. Thank you for the reminder, Ava said dryly. But we're flying commercial because I want you to see how the rest of the world moves. And also because my dad insisted on the party being in Seattle, not Atlanta, which means we don't exactly have the upper hand here. Layla shrugged but didn't argue further. She wandered off, muttering something about overpriced mini pretzels and screaming babies. Ava zipped her suitcase and stood up straighter. She adjusted the sleeves of her navy blue cardigan and glanced once more at the mirror. At 43, her face was still youthful, but worn in ways that only black women with high expectations and long memories understood. Fine lines whispered of late nights, raised voices in boardrooms, and battles she never told Layla about. She wasn't flashy, but she didn't bend either. Downstairs, the town car waited at the curb, engine running. Ava took one last glance around the house, the neat stack of mail by the door, Layla's forgotten water bottle on the console table,
the flickering nightlight in the hallway that Layla refused to give up and then pulled the door closed behind her. Their driver, a woman in her 40s named Sharon, offered a warm smile. "Morning, ladies. Headed somewhere special, Seattle," Ava replied, handing over their luggage. "My father's birthday." "Sounds important?" Ava smiled politely, but didn't elaborate. Sharon didn't press. As the car merged onto I-75 toward Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Layla tapped away at her phone while Ava stared out the window. Atlanta passed by in blurred fragments gas stations, early joggers, that same old billboard for auto insurance. She felt the familiar squeeze in her chest, the kind that showed up every time she left home. It wasn't fear exactly. It was alertness, anticipation wrapped in armor. "Do you think he'll have a speech prepared?" Layla asked, breaking the silence. "Of course," Ava said. "Your grandfather always has a speech." Layla grinned. "Think he'll cry? Absolutely not." A beat passed. "But I might." Layla glanced over, surprised. Ava wasn't one to admit vulnerability, at least not easily. But this trip, this return to her father's world, had been stirring something in her all week. It wasn't just the party. It was everything that came with it. The expectations, the history, the memories of a younger Ava being told to stand taller, speak clearer, work harder than everyone else just to get half as far. Solomon Bennett hadn't built his empire by being soft, and he hadn't raised Ava to be soft either. At the airport, security was efficient. Ava's platinum travel status got them into the priority line, though Layla complained loudly about having to take off her shoes. "I swear they do this just to make people feel small," Layla muttered, stuffing her hoodie into the bin. Ava didn't disagree, but she didn't say it out loud either. They stopped for coffee at a cafe near their gate. Ava scrolled through emails, Layla through TikTok. The terminal buzzed with movement business travelers in suits, families with kids, a bachelorette party in matching sweatshirts. When their boarding group was called, Ava stood and stretched. She handed Layla the boarding passes. "First class," Layla asked, eyes wide. It was the only direct flight available. Ava replied, "Don't get used to it." Layla smirked. Too late. As they walked down the jet bridge, Ava felt that shift again, the subtle tightening of the chest that came not from fear, but from the knowledge that sometimes comfort made you visible, and visibility had a price. The first-class cabin was calm, sterile, polite. Ava stowed her bag, took her seat, and watched as Layla put on her headphones and disappeared into a world of lo-fi beats and soft scrolling. The hum of the plane surrounded them, neutral and expectant. She exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. There was still turbulence ahead, but for now, they were airborne. The plane hadn't even left the tarmac yet, but Ava Bennett could already feel the quiet tension seeping through the first-class cabin like a fine mist. She'd taken the aisle seat, letting Layla have the window. It was always Layla's favorite part of flying, the view of the clouds, the miniature world below. Ava liked the aisle for different reasons: easier to access, easier to leave, if necessary. A flight attendant passed by offering pre-departure drinks. Ava asked for water. Layla declined, mouthing gross at the idea of orange juice from a plastic cup. Their seatmate hadn't arrived yet. Ava noticed that a flight attendant, the same one who'd greeted them at the door, kept glancing toward the cabin entrance with the strained patience of someone expecting trouble. It was subtle, but Ava noticed. She always did. She pulled her phone from her purse and opened an email, a meeting follow-up from a regional brand manager. Ava read it twice, but the words refused to land. Her mind kept drifting. Her father had called the night before, briefly and predictably efficient. "You and Layla packed?" "Yes." "Dad. Driver's name is Daniel. He'll be waiting near baggage claim." "Don't wander." She'd laughed. I'm not 13. I know. But Layla is 15 and curious. There had been a pause. Neither of them said it. But they both knew he meant well, that this protective tone came from somewhere real. Still, Ava always walked away from these exchanges feeling half-grown. She didn't need to be managed. She needed to be trusted. She looked over at Layla, who was now organizing her backpack like she was prepping for a 6-week expedition. Books, snacks, AirPods, 3 different lip glosses, a sketch pad. Do you think people look at us differently when we sit up here? Layla asked suddenly, her voice just above a whisper. Ava turned. What do you mean? I don't know. Like, most of the other people up here are older, white, kind of corporate looking. I heard a lady whisper something when we walked in. Ava paused before answering. What did she say? I couldn't hear all of it. Just something about the upgrades they give out these days. A familiar tightening pulled at Ava's stomach. She leaned in slightly. Listen, people will always have something to say when you don't fit their idea of who belongs where. That's not your business. Let them whisper. Layla nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on her backpack. It's just weird, like we're invisible until we're not. Ava looked away, pressing her tongue to the roof of her mouth. She understood all too well, that sense of being hyper-visible in the wrong moment and invisible in every other. Before she could respond, a sharp voice echoed from the front of the plane. Sir, please, we're doing everything we can. It was the flight attendant. Her voice was taut, controlled, but definitely strained. A tall white man in a gray blazer appeared in the doorway to first class. He looked irritated, his jaw tight, one hand clutching a leather duffel. Ava caught the tail end of the conversation as he stepped into the cabin. Was supposed to be 2A. You people can't read, or what? Ava glanced quickly at her own seat assignment. She and Layla were seated in 2A and 2B. The man turned to the lead flight attendant, who was now trying to guide him back toward the galley area. My profile says platinum, he said. I didn't pay 5 figures in annual fares to sit next to a crying baby. Ava arched an eyebrow. She hadn't heard a single baby since boarding. The flight attendant tried again. We're looking into it. Mr. Chase, if you'll give us a moment. Chase. The name rang a bell. Ava's fingers moved without thinking, pulling up a news article on her phone. Nolan Chase, COO of a logistics tech company with recent IPO buzz. Big fish. Ava had seen him at industry events before. She remembered him for the same reason she remembered most men in suits who looked right through her. He had power and poor eyesight when it came to people of color. He disappeared into the galley for the moment, leaving behind a thick fog of irritation and entitlement. Layla leaned over. Who was that? Someone who's used to getting his way. Ava replied. Don't worry about it. The flight attendant returned a moment later, placing a folded napkin and another bottle of water on Ava's tray table. We'll be departing shortly, she said, her smile as rehearsed as a showroom dummy. Ava nodded, but said nothing. As the aircraft began its slow roll toward the runway, Ava settled back into her seat. The engine hummed beneath her, steady and familiar. She closed her eyes briefly, let herself imagine the Seattle skyline, the gray spires, the salted breeze, her father's sharp eyes scanning her from across his massive living room. Layla tapped her arm. Mom Ava opened her eyes. Do you think something's going to happen on this flight? A beat, then a small, quiet answer. I hope not. But even as she said it, something inside her, a sixth sense honed by years of navigating spaces that were never built with her in mind, whispered otherwise. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime. Flight 227 was now fully airborne, gliding westward toward Seattle through an open stretch of pale blue sky. The captain's voice had come through a few moments earlier, cheerful, efficient, almost too casual, welcoming everyone aboard and promising a smooth ride and even smoother service. Ava Bennett wasn't convinced. She had already sensed the shift in air pressure, and it had nothing to do with altitude. It was something subtler, the unease behind the smiles of the crew, the way glances flicked from her to Layla. Then, back to the galley. A performance of normalcy, undercut by something brewing just out of sight. She sat with her arms gently crossed, e-reader on her lap, pretending to be absorbed in the latest title from her book club. But her mind wasn't on the plot twists. It was on the way the lead flight attendant. Jenna, she'd caught the name badge earlier, kept walking past their row, just a little too often. "Can I get you anything else?" Jenna asked again, her voice warm but firm. "We're all set," Ava replied for the third time. Layla, earbuds in, had already disappeared into a playlist and was gently nodding to the beat. She was completely unaware of the small storm building around them. Ava, however, felt every shift. Across the aisle, a middle-aged couple whispered quietly, glancing at their phones. A few rows ahead, a man in a blazer and tie dozed with practiced indifference, the kind of people who lived in boardrooms and never once questioned whether the table had been built for them. And then there was the empty seat. 2C. It hadn't been reassigned. No one new had boarded, but Nolan Chase hadn't returned to economy either. Ava noticed Jenna and another attendant, a younger woman named Kayla, conferring in the galley. Their hushed voices occasionally rose into snippets Ava could barely make out. "Still not satisfied. Says he'll file a complaint. Told him we're looking for options." Ava shifted in her seat, trying not to jump to conclusions. But they weren't hard to reach. Moments later, Jenna reemerged, her lips pressed into a tight line, and walked deliberately down the aisle toward Ava's row. She stopped just beside Ava's seat, crouching slightly in the practiced manner of someone trying to look cooperative. "Ms. Bennett," Jenna said gently. "Would you mind if I spoke with you privately for just a moment?" Ava's head tilted slowly. Her voice was calm. "You can say whatever you need to say right here." Jenna hesitated. She glanced at Layla, who had paused her music and was now watching the exchange. Brows furrowed. "It's just a small issue," Jenna continued, her voice soft. "There's been a reservation discrepancy. One of our passengers was mistakenly assigned an economy seat. We're trying to correct that now." Ava blinked. "And that concerns me how?" "Well," Jenna said, glancing briefly around the cabin before returning her focus. "We were hoping you and your daughter might be willing to switch to Economy Plus for the remainder of the flight." Silence. A slow, icy kind of silence. Ava looked at Layla, who was staring now, stunned. "Why us?" Ava asked simply. Her voice wasn't raised, but the edge behind it was unmistakable. "There are 12 passengers in this cabin. Why are you asking me?" Jenna blinked. "You're seated in the row the passenger originally booked." "That's not what I asked." The flight attendant faltered. "Ma'am, we're prepared to offer vouchers for future travel and additional miles. I paid for these seats," Ava said, her tone sharpening. "I booked them 6 weeks ago. I chose them deliberately. You're asking me, the only black passenger in first class, to move for someone else's comfort. I'm sorry, but that's not what this is about." Then what is it about? Jenna's expression twitched. Her eyes flicked toward the galley, again toward the problem waiting behind the curtain. Ava sat up straighter. "I'd like to speak to the captain," she said. Jenna straightened too, a little more rigid now. "He's busy flying the plane, ma'am." "Then bring me the purser, or your supervisor, or whoever is making this decision." The moment stretched. Jenna didn't move. "I'm not causing a scene," Ava continued, "but I'm not moving either, not until I understand why I'm the first person you came to." A few rows back, heads began to turn. Conversation stalled. One passenger, a woman with salt and pepper hair and soft eyes, locked eyes with Ava and gave a small, steady nod of support. The tension was building, and Ava, who had spent a lifetime measuring when to push back and when to let things go, knew this wasn't a moment to fold. Layla reached for her hand under the armrest and squeezed. It was the same hand Ava had once held through countless doctor appointments, school recitals, lonely nights after her divorce. The same hand that had never once let go when things got hard. "You okay?" Layla whispered. Ava nodded, but her jaw tightened, because she wasn't okay. She was angry and disappointed and tired, bone-deep tired of having to justify her presence in rooms she had earned her way into. "You're really not going to move?" Layla asked quietly, eyes wide. "No," Ava said softly. "Not this time. Not today." The curtain at the front of the cabin swished open with deliberate calm. Jenna returned, flanked now by Kayla and a tall man in a navy vest bearing the airline's logo, the purser. Presumably, his name tag read Mitchell. He smiled in that clipped, corporate way that wasn't quite apologetic, more rehearsed than warm. "Ms. Bennett," Mitchell began, his voice pitched for diplomacy. "We're so sorry for the inconvenience. I understand there's been some confusion." Ava didn't respond at first. She studied his expression, his posture, the way his eyes flicked past her to Layla, then quickly back again. "Confusion," she said finally. "That's what you're calling this." Mitchell gave a small, tight chuckle, the kind that usually followed. "Let's not make this bigger than it is. There was an error in our seating system," he explained, shifting his stance slightly. "A passenger with executive status was assigned to economy due to a glitch. We're working to accommodate him as best we can. The seat you're currently in was booked by me, paid in full, assigned properly." Ava interrupted. "There's no glitch here." Mitchell cleared his throat. "We're not disputing that. We're simply asking politely if you'd consider relocating to Economy Plus for the remainder of the flight. We'll provide compensation. Of course. Travel vouchers, loyalty credits, even a partial refund." "And why me?" Ava asked again, calmly but firmly. "Why not someone else? There are other open seats in this cabin. Why didn't you ask any of them?" Mitchell's smile dimmed. "You're seated in the specific row that was originally listed under his name." Ava didn't move. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that in all of first class, you asked the black woman and her daughter to move, and no one else? I'm sorry if it appears that way." "It doesn't appear that way," Ava said. "It is that way." There it was, again, that quiet, practiced tone. The one she used in meetings where men interrupted her. The one she had cultivated through years of code switching, calculating when to be warm, when to be assertive, when to disappear. Not today. Layla shifted in her seat, glancing around the cabin. Passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. A businessman in the row behind them lowered his newspaper, openly eavesdropping. Across the aisle, an older man rubbed his chin, gaze darting between Ava and the crew. "I don't want travel vouchers," Ava said. "I don't want loyalty points. I want to remain in the seat I paid for, next to my daughter." Mitchell hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Ms. Bennett, we'd really appreciate your cooperation in this. This particular passenger is a high-level flyer. He's been, frankly, very vocal. I'm sure he has." Ava sat back, her gaze steady. She could feel her pulse rising, but her face remained calm. Years of practice, decades of measured self-restraint. "What would you do?" she asked Mitchell quietly. "If I were a white man in a tailored suit, or if my name were Robert instead of Ava?" Mitchell flinched slightly. This has nothing to do with, doesn't it? The pause said more than any denial. Layla touched Ava's arm. Mom, it's okay. We can move. It's just a few hours. Ava turned to her daughter. Her voice softened, but the steel in it remained. That's what they count on. That we'll move to keep the peace. That we won't push back. That we'll disappear quietly so someone else can be more comfortable. Layla's hand dropped into her lap. Her mouth pressed into a line. Mitchell stood upright again, flustered now. If you won't move, Ms. Bennett, I'll need to consult with the captain. I think that's a good idea. Mitchell nodded stiffly and retreated toward the cockpit, Jenna and Kayla trailing behind him like a retreating procession. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, coiled. Passengers watched Ava now, some with curiosity, others with sympathy, and still others with discomfort. She could feel the weight of their gazes, like heat lamps in a lab. Layla exhaled sharply and slouched down in her seat. Across the cabin, a man with silver hair and a medical emblem on his carry-on bag leaned across the aisle. I'm a physician, he said, his voice low but clear. If there's a medical emergency, as they suggested earlier, I'd be happy to help. Ava turned to him. They said that. He nodded, briefly. Something about a child needing special attention, but there doesn't seem to be a child. Or a mother. Ava let out a breath through her nose. They lied, she said quietly. To justify moving me. The man shook his head. That's not just unprofessional, it's dangerous. Weaponizing false emergencies like that. I know, Ava replied. They just didn't expect me to ask questions. He looked at her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, the kind that said, I see you. The kind black people shared across crowded rooms when solidarity had to be subtle. Layla rested her head against Ava's shoulder. Silent. She didn't ask another question. Not yet. Ava reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. If this was going where she thought it was, she'd need backup. Not legal, not public, not yet, but someone with weight, someone whose name could cause a corporate structure to tremble. She scrolled through her contacts until she reached Dad, Solomon Bennett. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She hadn't called him in weeks. He always said she should lean on him more, but she'd resisted. For years, Ava had carved her own path, refusing to be Solomon Bennett's daughter in every room. She had fought to be seen for her own merit. But right now, she wasn't Ava the executive. She was Ava the target. And someone needed to know. Ava's fingers trembled only slightly as she tapped the call button. It wasn't fear, not really. It was the rush of adrenaline, the feeling of crossing a quiet line she'd always been trained not to disturb, the one between let it go and make them look you in the eye. She waited. Layla leaned closer. Mom, you're really calling Grandpa? Yes, but we're in the air. There's Wi-Fi. Is that even allowed? Ava didn't answer. She was already plugging in her earbuds, staring at the spinning wheel on her screen as the call attempted to connect through her secure app. In-flight Wi-Fi wasn't perfect, but it would be enough. It had to be. Behind her, whispers traveled like a quiet ripple through first class. Ava didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She knew what they were saying. She'd heard those whispers before, in different forms. Is she really making this a thing? Why doesn't she just move? She's overreacting. And then, finally, the line clicked. Hey, kid, came a familiar baritone. Aren't you supposed to be in the sky right now? I am, Ava replied, keeping her voice even. And we've got a situation. A pause. Tell me everything. Ava's eyes remained forward, locked on the in-flight monitor that showed their progress over Nebraska. She explained it clearly, calmly, the lie about the medical emergency, the pressure to move, the man who had yet to show his face but loomed large in every decision the crew was making. On the other end of the call, Solomon Bennett didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't ask, "Are you sure this is about race?" He knew better. When Ava finished, she could hear the change in his tone, the same subtle shift she remembered from board meetings growing up, when an executive had stepped out of line or a deal began to reek of exploitation. "I'll take care of it," Solomon said. "What's the airline? Transcontinental, the flight number 227. Captain's name, haven't got it yet, but I will." "Okay, don't go anywhere." Ava let out a short, dry laugh. Not planning to. As she ended the call, she noticed Mitchell reappearing at the front of the cabin. This time, he wasn't alone. Captain Foster, a tall man in his late 50s with neatly trimmed gray hair and pilot wings pinned to his chest, stood beside him. He wore the forced neutrality of a man accustomed to steering both planes and personalities. He approached slowly. "Ms. Bennett," he said, standing just beside her seat. "I understand there's been a disagreement about your seating assignment." "No disagreement," Ava replied, removing one earbud. "I paid for this seat. I'm sitting in it. Your crew asked me to move. I declined." The captain folded his hands in front of him. It was a simple request, intended to resolve a situation with another passenger who threw a tantrum. Captain Foster blinked. "You've asked the only black passenger in this cabin to relocate," Ava continued. "Under false pretenses, you fabricated a medical emergency." The captain's posture stiffened. "That's a very serious accusation." "Yes, it is." He hesitated. "We were told there was a child who needed additional space due to a severe peanut allergy. Is there a child?" No response. "Is there a mother?" An EpiPen, medical forms, anything. Captain Foster glanced at Mitchell, then back at Ava. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "we're trying to accommodate a very important passenger. There was a booking error. His original seat was mistakenly given away." Ava nodded slowly. "And so you created a cover story. One you thought I wouldn't question. This has nothing to do with race. Miss Bennett, did you ask anyone else to move?" Silence. Ava's voice lowered, cool and direct. "Don't lie. I've counted 8 other passengers in this cabin, all of them white." "But you came to me." Captain Foster swallowed. "Your team made a decision based on who they thought would be easiest to pressure. You decided I'd quietly surrender my seat. Smile. Be gracious. Accept the courtesy of being treated as lesser." Layla reached for Ava's hand under the armrest. Ava held it tightly. "You miscalculated." Ava finished. The captain's gaze faltered. Across the aisle, Dr. Ethan Rhodes spoke up. "Captain, if I may, I was told there was a medical issue. I offered assistance. I was told it was unnecessary." "That raised questions for me, too," Mitchell muttered. "We were trying to avoid escalation, but you created escalation." Ethan replied sharply. The cabin had gone silent again. Even those who had tried to hide behind newspapers and noise-canceling headphones were now watching openly. Captain Foster straightened his uniform. "Ms. Bennett, I understand your concerns. I'll speak with the crew. In the meantime, please remain in your seat. We'll make other arrangements. You'll need to," Ava said, "because I'm not moving." Without waiting for his reply, she slid her earbud back in and tapped a message to her father. They tried to deny it. Didn't work. Cabin watching, your move. The cabin didn't breathe for a full 5 seconds. Then the curtain at the front of first class parted for the 3rd time. There he was, Nolan Chase, 6'2", white, polished, and perturbed. His tailored blazer hung from his arm, and the expression on his face read as tired of waiting, not apologetic, not even curious, just entitled. He stepped forward slowly, flanked by Jenna and another attendant. Neither looked thrilled to be escorting him into the lion's den. As he approached Ava's row, he didn't look at her. He didn't glance at Layla. His eyes scanned the seats like a CEO evaluating conference room chairs. "Mr. Chase," Jenna began carefully. "We're still working to accommodate. I was told this was being resolved," he cut in, loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. "I fly this airline twice a week. I paid for 2A. Why is there a delay?" Mitchell stepped up. "We're speaking with the passenger currently seated. She should have been moved already." Chase snapped. "This is basic customer service." Ava turned slowly. For the first time, her eyes met his. "I paid for 2A too," she said calmly. "6 weeks ago, confirmed, assigned, booked." Nolan finally looked at her. His gaze flicked from Ava to Layla, then back again. "I wasn't referring to," he began, but stopped. His throat twitched. No apology, just recalibration, the kind of pause that said, "Oh, you're not someone I expected to resist me." Captain Foster cleared his throat. "Mr. Chase, there appears to have been a mix-up, but the passenger is seated correctly according to her boarding pass." "You mean I'm being downgraded?" Chase asked, blinking as if someone had suggested he sit in the luggage compartment. "You'll remain in Economy Plus," Foster confirmed, voice clipped. Nolan's lips parted in disbelief. "You're letting this become a scene over what principles?" Ava smiled. It wasn't warm. "Over dignity," she said, "something you might not understand." There it was, the line, drawn in quiet ink. Layla sat up straighter. She didn't say a word, but her eyes locked on her mother like she was seeing her for the first time, not just as mom, but as something larger, as witness, as resistor, as example. Jenna looked like she wanted the floor to open up beneath her. Kayla stared at her shoes. "I'll be filing a complaint," Nolan said. "You're welcome to," Ava replied. "I already made a call." At that moment, her phone buzzed on the tray table. A notification from her secure messaging app lit up. "Dad, just spoke to Carter Whitmore, CEO of Transcontinental. He's not happy. Said I'll handle it. Hold tight. Things are about to shift." Ava tucked the phone away. Nolan hadn't moved. "You know," he said after a long pause, "it's people like you who ruin the experience for the rest of us." The silence was instant. Dr. Ethan Rhodes stood up. "I think it's people like you," he said evenly, "who forget that the rest of us includes everyone, even women, even mothers, even passengers who don't look like you." The words hung in the air. Across the cabin, the older black woman who had nodded earlier folded her arms and sat a little taller. The woman beside her, a white executive in a power skirt, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Nolan turned without another word and stalked back toward the galley, his jaw tight. As the curtain swished shut behind him, the cabin seemed to exhale. Captain Foster cleared his throat again, clearly unsure of what to say next. "Ms. Bennett, you may remain in your seat," he said finally. "We apologize for the inconvenience." "Noted," Ava replied, already reaching for her book. He lingered for a second too long, then disappeared back toward the cockpit. Layla sat in stunned silence. Then finally, she whispered, "Mom, that was badass." Ava didn't laugh, not yet. Her shoulders were still tense, her breath still shallow. But she reached for Layla's hand again and gave it a squeeze. "No one should have to fight this hard to stay in a seat they already earned," she said softly. Layla nodded. "I'll remember that," she whispered. A few rows back, someone opened a phone camera. The screen tilted. A photo snapped. It had begun. It was less than 15 minutes after Nolan Chase disappeared behind the curtain when the cabin phone rang. A sharp electronic chime, followed by Jenna's voice, quieter now, more subdued as she answered it with a clipped, "Yes, Captain." She turned her back to the cabin as she listened. Ava watched her carefully. Even at this distance, she could see the change. Jenna's spine straightened, her head tilted slightly. Her eyes flicked in Ava's direction, then quickly away. Something had shifted. A moment later, Jenna hung up and stepped briskly toward the cockpit, her lips pressed into a thin line. Kayla watched her go, chewing the inside of her cheek nervously. Ava said nothing, but her pulse quickened. The pressure had started, and Solomon Bennett didn't bluff. She'd grown up watching him dismantle entire contracts with a sentence. She'd seen CEOs walk into rooms at full height and leave with their confidence hollowed out, their assumptions about who held power corrected in real time. When he said, "I'll handle it," he meant watch what happens next. Layla looked over at Ava's phone screen. Did Grandpa say anything? Ava showed her the last message. "Captain's being called now." Expect a tone change? Layla blinked. "He called the captain." "No." Ava said, "He called the CEO." The captain got the message. A few rows back, Ethan Rhodes, the doctor, gave Ava a small smile across the aisle. Not performative, just knowing, quiet camaraderie. The curtain opened again, but this time it wasn't Jenna or Mitchell. Captain Foster himself returned. He walked slower now, like someone carrying more than a clipboard or routine procedure. He approached Ava's seat with visible discomfort, his hat in hand. "Ms. Bennett," he began, quieter than before. "I've just spoken with our corporate office." Ava gave him nothing but a polite raise of her eyebrows. "Yes, I want to apologize for how this situation was handled. It's clear we failed to follow standard protocol and created confusion that was both avoidable and unfair." His words were practiced, but not insincere. There was something in the way his eyes kept flicking away to the floor, to the window, to the curtain that told Ava he had just received a phone call that made his hands shake. "You and your daughter will remain in your seats for the duration of the flight," he continued. "There will be no further requests made." "That's good to hear," Ava replied calmly. "And the crew members who fabricated a medical emergency?" The captain hesitated. Ava's tone didn't waver. "You told passengers there was a sick child who needed space." "That wasn't true. That's not just poor customer service, that's a safety protocol violation." He nodded. "I've submitted a report to HQ. I can't comment on further actions." "You don't need to. I already made a call." Captain Foster gave a small nod of understanding. "Is there anything else we can do to make your flight more comfortable?" Ava shook her head. "No. But perhaps consider updating your staff's training materials. Dignity shouldn't require escalation." "I agree," he said. He turned to leave, but paused. "For what it's worth," he added, "I've never seen this kind of response from HQ in real time. Whoever you called." "My father," Ava said, with the hint of a smile. "Solomon Bennett." Recognition crossed the captain's face like a light turning on in a dark room. "I see," he said. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett." As he walked away, Ava finally let her back press against the seat. She closed her eyes for a long moment, letting the adrenaline ebb from her chest. She'd held her ground, but that didn't mean she wasn't tired. The plane vibrated gently as it cut through the sky. Around her, silence resumed, but it wasn't the same kind of silence. It was heavier, awkward, reflective. She knew how that silence worked. It was the same silence she'd seen in conference rooms after calling out a male colleague for cutting her off. The same silence at parent-teacher meetings when she'd asked why her daughter had been assigned a lower math track without cause. The same silence that often followed her when she left a room powerful, unreadable, and a little too loud in what it didn't say. Layla shifted beside her. "Can I ask something?" "Of course. When you called Grandpa, were you scared they'd just say no, that they'd double down?" Ava thought about it. "I wasn't scared of the no," she said. "I was scared of the nothing, of being ignored. But they didn't ignore you." "No," Ava said, "because I spoke in a voice they recognize. Power. Does that feel good?" A pause. "It feels useful, but not good." Layla leaned against her again. "I still think it was badass." This time, Ava laughed. Just a little. It was the first laugh in over an hour. The hum of the engines returned as the dominant sound in the cabin. But the stillness that followed Captain Foster's apology was not peace. It was the eye of a storm, the kind where people pretend to move on but can't, where every sideways glance carries meaning, where a moment still hangs in the air, unresolved. Ava kept her book open on her lap, but hadn't read a page in 15 minutes. Her thoughts moved like an overfilled inbox, 1,000 windows open in her mind, none quite completing their task. She stared out the window, though Layla had the better view. Sky stretched wide, impossibly blue. For a moment, she wished she could be back home, curled on the couch with tea and silence, or at least in a space where she didn't have to teach the world how to treat her again and again, the cost of standing up even when you won was heavy. "I think people are scared of you now," Layla said quietly, half grinning. Ava looked over. "Why do you say that they're whispering again, but differently now, like you're dangerous?" Ava smiled faintly. "That's what happens when you don't apologize for taking up space." Layla nodded, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Ava's response was immediate. "Every day." She paused. "But I get more tired of what happens when I don't." Just then, the curtain separating first class from the galley opened again. The mood in the cabin shifted. This time, Ava didn't look up right away, but a voice from row 1 spoke. "Ms. Bennett." It was the older black woman, the one who'd offered that silent nod of solidarity earlier. Ava looked up. "I just wanted to say," the woman continued, "that what you did back there, it mattered. To a lot of us, even the ones who've spent years trying not to make waves." Ava blinked. The unexpected kindness tightened her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman smiled. "My name's Rachel Mendez. I've worked in HR for 30 years, sat through more diversity trainings than I can count, and I've still never seen anyone handle a moment like that with so much composure. I was just trying to protect my daughter." Ava replied. "Exactly," Rachel said, "which is why she'll remember it for the rest of her life." Across the aisle, another voice spoke up. "I've got to admit," said a white man in a checkered blazer, maybe mid-60s, "I've flown for 30 years and never seen an airline crew backpedal that fast. It was hard to watch, but it was necessary." Ava tilted her head. "Hard for who?" The man blinked. "Well, for everyone." "No," she said gently. "It was hard for people who don't usually get asked to give up anything. I've watched people look through me my whole life. This time, I made them see me." He didn't respond, but he looked down and nodded slowly. Rachel leaned forward in her seat and whispered, "Who?" "You've got the room listening now." Ava sighed deeply and finally closed her book. She turned to Layla. "I've spent most of my life trying to be palatable," she said, almost to herself. Smooth the edges. Smile even when I'm not okay. Speak like I'm never angry, never tired, like I owe the world my calm. But sometimes the world needs to see you unsettled. Layla was quiet for a moment. You're not like that with me. Ava gave a sad smile. Because I don't need to protect the world from my truth when I'm with you. I like the real you better, Layla said. Even when you're mad. Ava laughed quietly. Then the plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a soft, sudden jolt. Not enough to be alarming, just enough to remind everyone that even in the sky, you could still be shaken. The seatbelt sign lit up. Mitchell reappeared, subdued. He checked on each row silently. When he reached Ava's row, he didn't speak, just nodded. His eyes no longer held the manufactured certainty from before. He moved on. Ava leaned her head back against the seat. She'd won the moment. But she knew too well these moments didn't happen in isolation. They echoed, and once they began, you couldn't control where the echoes landed. The news broke somewhere over Utah. A soft chime rang through the cabin, announcing Wi-Fi service availability for the second half of the flight. Moments later, a flurry of notifications swept through first class like a gust of wind, phones vibrating, screens lighting up, whispers rising. And then someone said it, low but clear. Hey, is this her? A young woman in row 3 tilted her screen just enough for the passengers near her to see. On it, a paused video thumbnail showed Ava sitting upright in her seat, arms crossed, a steward hovering beside her, and her daughter's face partially visible. The title read, Black Mom Refuses to Give Up. First class seat for entitled white exec. Watch what happens next. Ava turned slowly. She didn't need to see the video. She knew the moment someone had started recording, she'd seen the phone angle earlier. Discreet, but deliberate. She just hadn't expected it to travel this fast. She reached for her own phone. Messages were already coming in from Kennedy coworker girl, you're on Twitter, and not just a little bit, from Marcus ex-husband Layla's okay, right. Also, holy set. From Melanie PR Dept. We need to talk when you land. You've become a moment. Ava stared at the screen, breath caught in her throat. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't just about a flight anymore. She glanced at Layla, who was already scrolling through the video. Her expression was unreadable. Mom, it has over 2 million views. Ava blinked. Already Layla nodded. It's everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, X, even Reddit. And they're calling you a hero. Ava's jaw tightened. I didn't do it to go viral, she murmured. I know, Layla said, quiet. But sometimes the right moment finds the right person. Across the aisle, Dr. Ethan Rhodes leaned over. If it helps, he said gently, you came across as poised, intelligent, and deeply reasonable. The airline, not so much. Ava gave a half smile. That's one way to phrase it. From the galley. Mitchell returned this time holding a printed memo. His face was pale, the expression of someone walking through the aftermath of a mistake they could no longer fix quietly. He stopped in front of Ava's seat. Ms. Bennett, he began, his voice lower than usual. The captain asked me to inform you. He paused, swallowing hard, that corporate has authorized a full apology, and a statement will be issued before the flight lands. They've also informed Mr. Chase that he will not be receiving further elite accommodations on this flight or in future bookings pending review. The words were clear, but Ava could tell Mitchell was struggling to deliver them. There was something behind his tone, embarrassment, regret, fear, maybe all three. He handed her the printed statement. It was brief but formal. We recognize that a valued passenger on Flight 227 was asked to relocate inappropriately. We deeply regret the incident and are committed to examining and revising our customer service protocols. Diversity, equity, and dignity are not optional values at Transcontinental. Ava folded the paper once, neatly, and tucked it into her purse. "Thank you," she said. Mitchell lingered. I didn't realize who you were." Ava tilted her head. "And if I hadn't been someone important, would I have still been asked to move?" He didn't answer. She didn't expect him to. He left without another word. Layla turned to her mother, brow furrowed. "Is it weird that it doesn't feel like enough?" "It's not," Ava said quietly. "But it's a start." The cabin had changed again, not in noise, but in posture. Passengers no longer looked away. Several nodded as Ava passed on her way to the restroom. Someone she didn't see who slipped a note under her tray table that read, "Thank you for standing your ground." My daughter needed to see that today. When she returned to her seat, the older woman, Rachel Mendez, smiled at her. "You realize what's happening, don't you?" Rachel said. Ava shook her head, slowly. "What you're becoming the story." Ava sighed. "That's what scares me." Rachel placed a gentle hand over Ava's. "Don't let them twist it. Don't let them turn your courage into a brand. You didn't do this to go viral. You did it to be seen. And we saw you." Ava closed her eyes for a moment. So many memories flooded back the time she didn't speak up when a colleague took credit for her pitch, the time a woman called her articulate with surprise in her voice, the time her daughter came home from school asking why the security guard always followed her in the store, every moment where silence seemed easier, and every moment where silence came with a price. She inhaled deeply. The reversal had come, but now she had to carry it forward. The landing gear touched down with a soft jolt. As the plane rolled down the runway at SeaTac, Ava looked out at the tarmac, watching as the gray Seattle sky cast long reflections over the asphalt. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and a familiar rustle swept through the cabin, people gathering their things, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to know what had happened 37,000 feet in the air. But everyone knew. From the galley, Mitchell made his final announcements, his voice clipped and monotone, now almost a whisper compared to earlier. Ava remained seated, letting the crowd clear. She wasn't ready to re-enter the world just yet. The cabin had become a paradoxical space tense, exhausting, but also strangely affirming. Outside these walls, she was trending. Inside, she was tired. Layla watched her mother, a quiet bubble of concern wrapped around her teenage calm. "You okay?" she asked. "I will be," Ava said. "Just need a second." A voice came through the intercom. It wasn't Mitchell. It wasn't Jenna. It was Captain Foster. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before you disembark, I want to take a brief moment to acknowledge a situation that occurred on today's flight. A passenger was asked to give up her assigned seat due to a miscommunication on our end. This should not have happened. Transcontinental apologizes and is taking immediate action to ensure it never does again. We thank Ms. Ava Bennett for her patience and poise." Gasps and murmurs followed. Ava felt every eye turn toward her row, but she didn't move. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just sat composed, unmoved, not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for herself. Mitchell opened the curtain a final time. "Ms. Bennett, you and your daughter may disembark now. There's someone waiting for you at the gate." Ava stood, gathered her carry-on, and turned to Rachel Mendez one last time. "Thank you," Ava said, voice low. Rachel nodded. "No, sweetheart. Thank you." They stepped into the jet bridge, where cool air hit her like a reset button. A young black woman in a navy suit waited just outside the terminal, a tablet in hand and nervous smile. "Ms. Bennett?" she asked. "My name is Danielle. I'm with the Seattle Executive Liaison Team. Your father's car is waiting downstairs," and she hesitated. "There are some members of the press here. We've routed them elsewhere." "For now?" Ava blinked. "Press." Danielle nodded. "CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates. It's a lot." Layla's eyes widened. "We're famous," Ava groaned softly. "No, honey, we're just a story today." She took Layla's hand and walked briskly toward the private elevator. Her fingers never stopped trembling, not from fear, but from fatigue, from restraint, from the thousand emotions pressed beneath the surface like tectonic plates. By the time they exited the terminal and spotted the familiar black sedan, the clouds had opened slightly. Sunlight streamed through in fractured beams, soft and hesitant, like it wasn't quite sure if it belonged. A man in a charcoal suit stood beside the car. Solomon Bennett, impeccably dressed, commanding as ever, his silver hair catching the light like a crown. Grandpa Layla called out, running ahead. He opened his arms and pulled her in, kissing the top of her head. Then he turned to Ava. "You good?" he asked. Ava gave a small nod. Better now. He opened the car door himself, ushering her inside like royalty. The car pulled away, gliding through downtown Seattle like it had a purpose. For a while, no one spoke. Then Solomon finally asked, "You want me to shut it down?" Ava turned toward him. "Shut what down?" "The press, the firestorm, the corporate spin." "I can have the airline release a statement saying the matter's resolved. Encourage the media to move on." Ava considered that. She watched the skyline pass by, cranes building more buildings, more glass walls that kept people like her out unless they pushed hard enough. "No," she said. "Let it burn a little." Solomon looked surprised, but not displeased. "You sure I'm sure?" She paused. "But I don't want to be your daughter who stood up on a flight. I don't want to be a brand or a symbol. I just want to go home." "You may not get that," he said, "at least not right away." "I know." Another beat passed. Solomon reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Transcontinental reached out. "They're offering you a consulting role. Oversight for diversity and customer equity initiatives, executive level. Direct report to the CEO." Ava stared at the folder. "They're trying to buy redemption," she said. "They're trying to avoid lawsuits. But they also know you're qualified." She took the folder, didn't open it. "I need to think." He nodded. "Good. Think. But don't hide. What you did, it was brave." "I wasn't trying to be brave," she said. "I know," he replied. "But the world doesn't care about intentions. It cares about impact." The car turned onto a quiet residential street, their family estate near the water. Ava stared out at the gray waves, soft and foaming against the edges of the world. She had asked for a seat. She had paid for a seat, but she'd ended up with a stage. The Bennett estate in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood sat high above the bay, where glass met pine and old money whispered behind wrought iron gates. The house itself more modest than Solomon could afford, but elegant in a way that spoke of restraint, was glowing with warm lights, the sound of jazz floating from the open windows into the spring air. Inside, the party had already begun. It wasn't just a birthday celebration for Solomon Bennett's 70th. It had become a soft power summit. Politicians, CEOs, activists, and a few carefully chosen journalists floated between the living room and terrace. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter spiked, and beneath it all ran the pulse of a new story, Ava Bennett, the woman who didn't move. She stood near the window, wearing a simple black jumpsuit and low heels,
clean lines, quiet elegance. Layla was somewhere in the crowd, already pulled into a circle of cousins and second-hand admirers. She'd come downstairs glowing, teenage pride humming around her like an aura. Ava didn't feel like glowing. She felt watched. "Ah, the woman of the hour," someone said behind her. She turned to see Congressman Elliot Voss, one of her father's longtime associates. White, genial, and entirely too comfortable. "You really lit a fire this week," he said, chuckling as if she'd told a good joke. "Solomon's been bragging like you launched a rocket." Ava smiled thinly. "All I did was refuse to be moved." "Yes, well," Voss said, raising his glass, "you did it beautifully. That's what counts." She didn't reply, just nodded and moved away. On the far side of the room, she spotted her father deep in conversation with a man she recognized as Bradley Kim, the head of a major consulting firm. They both turned as she approached. "Excuse us," Solomon said, dismissing the small group with the effortless authority he'd carried for decades. When they were alone, he tilted his head toward the terrace. "Let's get some air." They stepped outside, onto a balcony that overlooked the bay. The moon hung low and full, casting the waves in silver. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked. Ava took a long breath. "That's a complicated question. Always is," he said. "When you become the message..." She looked at him. "That's what I wanted to talk about." Solomon leaned on the railing. "Go ahead." "I don't know how to carry this," Ava said. "The attention, the expectations, the people who want me to speak on panels, sign statements, lead reform." He nodded. "It's a lot. It's not just about what happened on the flight." She continued, "It's about everything that comes after. The media wants a clean narrative, the airline wants a quick fix, and everyone else wants a new face for a fight that never ends." Solomon turned to her. "So, what do you want?" "I want to be respected without needing a crisis to earn it," Ava said. "I want Layla to grow up in a world where she doesn't have to perform strength just to survive." Solomon studied her face. "You know," he said quietly, "your mother once told me something I never forgot. She said, 'Legacy is not just what you leave behind, it's the courage you model when no one's watching.'" Ava's eyes burned. "I didn't want a legacy, I just wanted a seat." "You got both," he said. "Now, what are you going to do with them?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the ring on her finger, a simple gold band her mother had worn, now passed to her, a reminder of quieter battles, quieter victories. "I don't know yet," she finally said, "but I'm thinking about it." Solomon smiled. "That's all I ask." From inside, the music paused. A voice announced that speeches would begin shortly. Solomon turned toward the sound. Time to be celebrated. He started back inside, then paused. "You coming in a minute?" she said. He nodded once and left, alone on the balcony. Ava looked out at the water, at the skyline that her father had helped shape and dominate, and the world that was now watching her with fresh eyes. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had asked not to be erased and now had to live with being seen. Behind her. The applause began. 3 days later, the world had already moved on. Another scandal, another trending video, another distraction pulling people's attention elsewhere. But Ava Bennett still hadn't returned home. Instead, she found herself back on the terrace of her father's estate, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hand, watching the fog roll in from the bay. The city looked softer beneath it, muted, as if even Seattle had needed a break from being visible. Inside, Solomon was on a conference call. His voice occasionally filtered out through the glass doors, clipped, authoritative, familiar. Layla sat across from Ava,
curled up with a sketchbook in her lap, pencil dancing lightly as she worked. She didn't speak much that morning, which was unusual. She hadn't been on social media all day, which was even more unusual. "You okay?" Ava asked. Layla nodded, but it wasn't automatic. She closed her book and looked up. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you wish you'd moved?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Ava leaned back in the chair, letting the question settle like sediment in her chest. "I thought about it," she admitted. "In that moment, I felt small, not because I was wrong, but because I was tired. Tired of always having to prove something just to keep what I'd already earned." Layla didn't interrupt. She listened. "And if I'd moved," Ava continued, "it would have been quieter, easier, no spotlight, no cameras, no unwanted praise or awkward stares." "But you didn't," Layla said. "No," Ava replied, "because sometimes doing what's easier just teaches the next person to stay silent. And I couldn't do that to you." Layla's eyes glistened. "I don't want to be quiet either." Ava reached into her bag and pulled out the airline's formal written apology, the one they emailed, printed, and hand-delivered. The one that came with an offer to co-lead a new passenger equity task force. It sat untouched in her inbox for 2 days. She handed it to Layla. "What do I do with this?" Layla asked. "Whatever you want," Ava said. "Tear it up. Frame it, burn it for art, but know that what happened matters not because they apologized, but because we didn't let them forget." Layla looked down at the paper and nodded. "Also," Ava added, pulling something else from her purse, "I got you something. It was a small box, velvet, simple." Layla opened it and gasped. Inside was her grandmother's pin, a gold emblem in the shape of a seat, carved in minimalist lines. Ava had worn it once before, tucked onto a lapel during her MBA graduation years ago. "What is this?" "It's your seat," Ava said. Layla looked up. "I want you to remember," Ava continued, "that no one ever gives you your place in this world. You either build it or you defend it, and either way, you own it." Layla's lip quivered. She blinked fast. Ava took her daughter's hand, pressing it gently. "People will try to move you," she said. "They'll act like your voice is too loud, your presence too bold, your seat too expensive. Don't shrink. Don't slide over. Don't apologize." Layla nodded. "I won't." They sat in silence for a while, the pin in her lap, the sea fog pressing soft against the windows. Then Layla spoke again. "So what now?" "Mom." "You gonna take the job?" Ava smiled faintly. "I think I already did," she said, the moment I stayed in my seat. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply didn't move. And in doing so, Ava Bennett reminded the world that dignity is not something we ask for, it's something we refuse to give away. In a cabin full of silence and assumptions, she claimed her space not just for herself, but for her daughter, for every unseen passenger who's ever been asked to make room, stay quiet, or accept less. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about the deeper cost of invisibility and the louder truth of choosing to be seen. Her story may have gone viral. But her strength, that's not a headline, that's a legacy. So what do we take from this? That systemic bias thrives in silence, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stay right where you are. Let us know in the comments. What would you have done in her seat if this story moved you? If it made you think, or made you feel something deeper? Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real stories that challenge, heal, and inspire. Because sometimes, one flight can change everything. We'll see you in the next story.